Hello, welcome to Unbelievable Tales.
What kind of man leaves a locked room off limits, even to his new bride? Lily Carter thought she understood the deal, marry Edward Grantham, 73-year-old millionaire, and secure her brother's future. No questions, no love, just a quiet life behind gilded gates. But 7 days into the marriage, she heard a sound in the night and followed it. What she found wasn't betrayal. It was a secret so unthinkable it made her wonder if she'd married a stranger or stepped into a life she was never meant to survive. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The Grantham estate was nothing like Lily had imagined. It wasn't cold marble halls and sweeping staircases, though those were there too, but quiet gardens, warm wood floors, and an eerie, museum-like stillness that settled over everything. The staff barely spoke. Her husband, Edward, spoke even less. She was 23 when she walked down that aisle in a borrowed designer dress, her fingers clenched so tight around the bouquet that her knuckles turned white. Edward didn't smile when he saw her. He simply nodded like a man checking a box. She repeated her vows in a voice that sounded too small for a room so grand, then signed a paper with trembling hands. His lips brushed her cheek. No one clapped. She had married him for one reason, to save her brother. Josh needed a life-saving treatment they couldn't afford. Edward's assistant had found her after an act of kindness went viral, Lily giving up her coat to a stranger outside a hospital. The story spread. So did her name. A meeting was requested. A proposal was made. 2 years, Edward had said. In exchange, I'll fund everything and leave you with more than you could imagine. She thought it was a transaction. She thought she could handle it. But that first week felt like living inside someone else's story. Edward dined precisely at 6. He read every evening in the library no one else was allowed in. And one room in the East Wing remained locked always. Storage, he said curtly when she asked. Don't go near it. She didn't question it. She barely spoke. In photos, they looked like a wealthy grandfather and his well-dressed granddaughter on a formal tour. They rarely touched. She slept in the blue guest bedroom. She didn't mind. Until the 7th night. It started with a noise, soft, dragging like a chair being pulled across stone. She sat up in bed, heart racing. The hallway light blinked once, then returned. The house was old, she told herself. Pipes. Wind. Nothing else. But she heard it again. Louder this time. Below. Lily slipped from bed, pulling a shawl around her shoulders. The floor was cold beneath her bare feet as she crept down the grand staircase, her breath held tight in her chest. The sound had stopped. She reached the first floor, then paused. Everything was still. She turned toward the East Wing. The door at the far end, the one always locked, stood slightly ajar. Her mouth went dry. She could leave. Go back upstairs. Pretend she never saw it. But something pulled her forward. The hall narrowed the farther she walked, as if the house itself was folding in. The door creaked as she pushed it open. The room beyond was dim, lit only by the flickering bulb of an old chandelier. Dust motes danced in the stale air. And in the center, surrounded by covered furniture and shadowed paintings, was a piano. It was open. Someone had been here. Lily stepped closer, brushing the cover of the bench. There was something on it, a faded photograph tucked beneath the sheet music. She picked it up. A young woman, early 20s, smiling in front of the same piano. Her face was unfamiliar, but the eyes, they looked like hers. She turned the photo over. Catherine, 1978. A breath caught in her throat. The ink was smudged. The paper aged. She set it down and stepped back, straight into something solid. Edward. His hand gripped her arm, firm but not cruel. You shouldn't be in here. I heard something, she whispered. The door was open. His face didn't change. He simply looked at her like one might look at a painting that had shifted. Then he said, almost softly, leave it alone. She wanted to ask, who was Catherine? Why was that photo hidden? Why did this room feel more alive than the rest of the house? But she didn't. She nodded, and he let her go. That night, she didn't sleep. She called Josh. His voice was bright, he sounded stronger already. The treatment had started. He asked how the mansion was, if the pool was real, if her new husband wore top hats. She laughed, lied a little, told him she was okay. But her eyes kept drifting to the locked door at the end of the hall. And the feeling that she'd stepped into something far bigger than a contract wouldn't leave her chest. The next morning, the housekeeper was gone. The one who always brought Lily her tea. Her room was empty. Her name, Marta, was removed from the schedule. When Lily asked, the butler said quietly she resigned. But Marta had told her the day before that she'd been at Grantham Estate for 21 years. She had no family left. No place else to go. That evening, Edward didn't come down for dinner. A man in a gray suit arrived instead. Introduced himself as Mr. Kessler. Legal advisor, he said with a tight smile. Just handling estate paperwork. He gave Lily a document to sign. It wasn't in the prenup. It was titled Non-Disclosure Addendum Supplementary Amendment to Agreement G7. What's this? She asked. Standard protocol, he replied. Security. Privacy. The Grantham name is quite visible. But there was a section blacked out. She pointed. Why is this redacted? He smiled again. Some things are above your clearance, Mrs. Grantham. Her stomach twisted. I'd like to speak to Edward before I sign anything else. Kessler's smile flickered. Of course. But he's resting. We'll try again tomorrow. He left. She didn't sign. That night, she went back to the east wing. The door was locked again. But the handle felt warm. Inside, something was changing. And for the first time, Lily realized she might not have married a man at all. She might have married into a story she was never meant to finish. The next morning, the silence in the mansion felt different. Not calm, but alert, as if the walls themselves were listening. Lily woke early, unable to shake the memory of the warmth on the doorknob, the photo, the redacted document. She dressed quickly and walked to the kitchen, only to find it empty. No breakfast tray. No staff. She wandered into the garden, hoping to clear her thoughts, but paused when she saw Mr. Kessler on the phone near the greenhouse. He didn't notice her. His voice was low and clipped. No, she hasn't signed yet. Yes, I understand. But rushing her will only trigger suspicion. Yes. I'm monitoring her closely. Lily froze. He turned suddenly, too suddenly, and she ducked behind a column. Her heart thundered. His words echoed in her ears. She wasn't paranoid. They were watching her. Later that afternoon, she received a message, a simple white envelope slipped under her door. No handwriting. No seal. Inside, a single sheet of paper. It read, "Look beneath the piano." She stared at the words, her fingers trembling. The warning, the redacted contract, the missing staff, it was all connected. And someone inside this house was trying to help her. That night, she waited until the lights dimmed and footsteps faded. She counted the minutes until the halls felt hollow again. Then, barefoot and trembling, she crept to the east wing. The door was locked. But this time, the small silver key she found in her wardrobe drawer hours earlier, unmarked, out of place, fit the lock perfectly. Inside, the air was colder. The chandelier flickered again. She moved carefully past the piano, knelt down, and reached beneath. Her fingers brushed velvet. A box. She pulled it out. It was heavy, wrapped in old red fabric and sealed with a tarnished latch. She unhooked it and slowly opened the lid. Inside were documents, photos, audio tapes, and journals. The first journal was labeled Catherine, 1976. Her hands trembled as she turned the page. The writing was neat, deliberate. And on the first line, the words chilled her. If something happens to me, let it be known Edward Grantham is not who he says he is. The pages that followed were filled with entries, intimate, emotional, terrified. Catherine described the same house, the same rules, the same locked doors. But her relationship with Edward had been different. They had been in love. Or so she thought. Until the accidents began. Staff disappearing. Strange visitors. A hidden lab in the sub-basement, a place Catherine was never allowed to see. She had once followed Edward during a stormy night and heard him speaking in another language to someone through a radio, a language she couldn't identify. One entry ended mid-sentence, ink trailing off as if torn away. Lily clutched the book, every nerve in her body lit with dread. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience. This was a maze. A trap. She closed the journal and backed away, intending to return the box, but a faint creak echoed from behind the door. She wasn't alone. The chandelier blinked. Footsteps approached. Lily extinguished the lamp and slipped behind the curtains. The door opened slowly and Edward stepped inside. He didn't look confused. He looked expectant, as if he knew someone had been here. He walked to the piano, stood still for several seconds, and then looked down, straight at the empty space beneath it. His eyes narrowed. He knelt and found the missing box gone. Lily pressed her mouth shut, barely breathing. He rose slowly, his frame still tall and commanding despite age. And then he said softly to no one, "You should have stayed in your room." She didn't move until he was gone. Back in her own room, she buried the box under a floorboard and locked the door. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She needed answers, not rumors, not diaries. She needed someone who knew Catherine. At breakfast the next morning, served without a word by a new maid she didn't recognize, Lily asked Edward plainly, "Who was Catherine?" He didn't flinch. "Someone I once loved. She died a long time ago." "How?" "Car accident." Lily nodded, pretending to accept the lie. But that night, she called an old classmate of hers, a journalism student named Tasha, who owed her a favor. "Can you find anything about a woman named Catherine, possibly connected to the Grantham estate? Mid to late 70s? Tasha hesitated. "That's a long time ago. Please. I think something happened to her." "Okay. Give me a few days." Lily hung up and stared at the curtains, half expecting them to move. 3 nights passed. No notes. No new entries. Edward didn't mention the box. The staff was quiet, colder. The new maid never made eye contact. On the 4th night, Lily received a voicemail. "Lily," Tasha whispered. "I don't know what you've gotten into, but I found something." Catherine Jameson filed a missing persons report in 1979 on herself. She claimed she was being erased. Her case was closed 3 months later. Official cause of death, accident. But I found photos. She never left the country. And get this, she had a sister, Margaret, still alive. Lives 2 towns over. I'll text you the address. Lily's fingers clenched around the phone. She dressed quietly, slipped out the servant entrance, and called a cab from the road. When she arrived at the small cottage Tasha had mentioned, a woman in her 60s opened the door. She stared at Lily for a long moment, and then her face crumpled. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You look just like her." Lily stepped back. "You knew Catherine?" The woman, Margaret, pulled her inside. And what she revealed changed everything. Margaret poured tea with shaking hands. The cottage smelled like old lavender and paper. Faint light filtered through lace curtains, dancing across dozens of framed photographs, some black and white, others faded color. None included Catherine. "I always knew she didn't die in that crash," Margaret whispered, voice catching. "But they told me to move on. That it was an accident. A body was found," they said, "buried under a false name." Lily sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, her pulse hammering in her ears. "What happened to her? Do you know?" "She was scared," Margaret said, placing a photo album between them. "She called me 2 weeks before she disappeared. Said he was hiding something. That she wasn't sure he was even who he claimed to be." "Edward?" "Yes. Though back then he went by Edmund. Same man. Different name." Lily blinked. "He changed his identity?" Margaret nodded. She said he never aged. Not in the years she knew him. That he was always one step ahead. He controlled everything from who she saw to what she wore. She said she felt watched. Lily felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The exact same things she'd been feeling every day since she stepped into that house. Margaret continued, her voice more brittle now. She told me if anything happened to her, I'd never find her body, that he'd erase every trace. She kept journals, Lily said softly. I found one. Tears filled the older woman's eyes. Then she must have known she'd never make it out. Lily looked down at the album, unsure what to say. I don't know who that man really is, Margaret said. But I don't believe Catherine was his first secret. And I doubt she was his last. Lily left the house just as clouds began to gather. The cab ride back felt longer. She stared out the window, questions building like thunder in her chest. What kind of man could change names, bury wives, and live untouched in the public eye for decades? Back at the estate, the house seemed to breathe slower, quieter. Edward was waiting in the drawing room. He stood when she entered, hands behind his back, eyes unreadable. You left the grounds, he said calmly. I needed air. You didn't tell anyone. I didn't know I needed permission. He regarded her for a long, heavy moment, then said simply, that will be all for tonight. But when she turned to leave, his voice followed. Did Margaret say anything useful? Lily froze. She hadn't told him where she was going. She turned slowly. You knew I'd go to her? I expected it eventually. So you've been watching me. He didn't deny it. You've been watching me too. I'm not the one hiding the truth. Edward walked to the window, one hand brushing the curtain aside. Truth, he murmured. That's a dangerous word in this house. She stepped forward. Then tell me who Catherine really was. What happened to her? And who you were before Edward Grantham. He smiled, faint and sad. Do you really want the truth? Yes. Even if it means everything you've built this marriage on, every reason you convinced yourself to stay crumbles in seconds? I'd rather have broken truth than a perfect lie. He looked at her then, not as a stranger, not as a husband, but as something older. Tired. Haunted. I didn't kill her, he said. But she's gone. He nodded. Did she die here? Yes. Lily felt like the floor shifted beneath her. But not the way you think. Edward turned and walked toward the fireplace, picking up a small framed photo. It was of Catherine smiling in a garden, her hair caught in the wind. She got sick, he said. Something rare. And she changed. Grew afraid. Not of me, of everything. Of the world. She thought people were watching her. That I was being followed. She stopped sleeping. I tried to help, but she kept slipping. Then one night, she walked into the woods. And never came back. Then why hide it? Lily asked. Why fake her death? Why bury her under another name? Edward's voice dropped. Because she begged me to. She didn't want the world to know what became of her. She didn't want pity, or headlines, or whispers about her losing her mind. Lily didn't know if she believed him. She wanted to, but the weight of unanswered questions clung to her like wet fabric. That night, she didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She sat by the fireplace in the guest room, the journal open in her lap, rereading the entries again and again. One line stood out. If I vanish, know this, the room beneath the garden holds everything. Lily stared at it. There was no basement under the garden. At least, not that she knew of. But the next morning, she slipped out before sunrise, past the trimmed hedges and stone paths, to the old greenhouse no one ever used. Behind it, the grass sloped downward toward a half-hidden cellar door. It was locked with a rusted chain. But the key she'd used before, the one that opened the east wing, worked again. The door groaned open. A stairway led down into the earth. She lit her phone's flashlight and descended. The air grew colder, damp. The smell of metal and earth clung to her skin. At the bottom was a concrete room. Old cabinets, a desk, walls lined with files, and in the center a metal table. She stepped closer. On it sat a single box, new, polished. Inside, medical records, photos, and vials, dozens of them. She picked up one and read the label. Project CJ, Sample 12, Retinal Memory Mapping 1981. She staggered back. This wasn't a lab. It was an experiment. And Catherine hadn't just been a wife. She'd been a subject. A knock sounded behind her. Soft, deliberate. Lily spun. Edward stood at the top of the stairs. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said quietly. She stepped backward, voice shaking. "What is this?" His eyes met hers, and for the first time there was no mask, only the truth. "You weren't supposed to be the one." Lily didn't speak. Her mind struggled to form questions, to understand the words she just heard. But her voice failed her. Edward descended the stairs with a slowness that didn't match his age. His posture was steady, spine unervingly straight, steps measured. There was no limp, no stiffness. He didn't move like a man in his 70s. He stopped 2 steps from the bottom, folding his hands in front of him. "This project," he said softly, gesturing to the box of vials, "was never meant to be a secret, not in the beginning." Lily took another step back. "You experimented on her." He didn't flinch. "She volunteered." "You're lying." "She believed in it." His tone was disturbingly calm. Memory retrieval, preservation, the ability to store what the human mind forgets, to archive emotion, sensation, memory like data. She thought it was beautiful. Lily shook her head slowly, her back brushing against the concrete wall. She was terrified. "She became terrified," he corrected, "because the brain isn't designed to remember everything. There are limits." She passed them. "You watched her unravel." "I tried to stop it, but it was too late." The silence pressed against her skin like cold fog. "And now what?" she asked. "You marry me." "What for? To run more tests? Am I your next volunteer?" "No," he said almost gently. "You were never part of the program." She blinked. "You were the insurance." That word cracked something open in her chest. "What do you mean?" Edward stepped closer, but stopped when she stiffened. "After Catherine, after everything collapsed, the people behind the program, the investors, the handlers, the silent partners, they wanted to make sure I could be managed, watched, controlled. And for a while I was. But then the press caught wind of one of the early files. A leak. Nothing public, but enough to scare them." Lily stared. "So you needed a distraction." "I needed a way to secure silence, to create stability and marriage. A young, sympathetic wife with a social media following, a tragic backstory, and a marriage of convenience. It softened my image, shielded me." She could hardly breathe. "You used me." "Yes," he said quietly. She laughed once, came out broken. "At least you're honest." Edward looked almost remorseful. "I didn't expect you to care, to ask questions, to matter." A new silence stretched between them, this one darker, heavier. Lily stepped forward, anger replacing fear. "Then why now? Why not end it once I found the files? Why talk to me like I still matter?" "Because you're not just a shield anymore," he said. She froze. "You're leverage. And I believe someone is trying to take that away from me." Lily's heart dropped. "What are you talking about?" He turned and unlocked a drawer in the metal desk, pulling out a folder. Inside were printed photographs, candid shots of her walking in the garden, talking on the phone, entering Margaret's house. "I didn't take these," he said, "and no one from my staff did either." She stared at them, ice running through her spine. "I believe someone within the original program has gone rogue. They see you as a liability, a link to something they want erased. Catherine's sister, the journals, even your brother." Lily's eyes widened. "Josh?" Edward nodded. "They know about the payment, the medical records. They could twist it, make it look like blackmail. Or worse. Her voice broke. Then help me. I am, he said. By telling you what no one else will. She shook her head. You're doing it to protect yourself. True. But that doesn't mean I don't want to protect you too. She didn't believe him. Not fully. But she didn't feel safe leaving that room either. So what now, she asked. I've arranged a safe house. Outside the city. You'll take the journals. The tapes. Everything. Disappear for a while. And you. I'll handle the rest. Lily stared at him. You're not going to disappear with me. No. Because you're not done hiding. Because I've stopped hiding. This ends with me. She wanted to scream at him. Wanted to claw the truth out of his throat. But instead, she turned and fled the room. Within an hour, she was in a black SUV heading north, a man named Vincent at the wheel. He didn't speak. Didn't ask questions. The box of evidence sat on the seat beside her, wrapped in her coat. At the safe house, a small lodge tucked behind pine trees and fog, she finally exhaled. For 3 days, she didn't sleep properly. She cataloged every document, scanned pages, made backups. She called Tasha, updated her. Tasha was already contacting a journalist with connections. They agreed to keep things quiet for now. On the 4th night, a knock came. Not on the front door. On the window. She froze. Walked slowly across the room. A folded note was taped to the glass. You were never supposed to survive this long. There was no signature. Her phone had no signal. She grabbed the box and ran to the SUV. But Vincent was gone. In his place, another note on the steering wheel. Too late. She ran back inside and locked every door. 30 minutes passed. An hour. Then headlights. But not just one set. 3. They stopped at the edge of the clearing. Lily backed toward the fireplace, holding the box like a shield. The power cut out. She was alone. Or so she thought. A voice sounded behind her. Low. Familiar. You need to come with me. Now. She turned. Edward stood there, wet from the rain, blood at his temple. They found me, he said. And they won't stop until they've erased everything. She didn't move. Lily, he said. You have a choice. Stay here and they'll come through that door. Or trust me one last time. Her hands trembled. Then she nodded. He grabbed her arm and they ran into the storm, into the trees, into the one place that might still be dark enough to hide them. Behind them, the world burned quietly. But somewhere deep beneath the fear, Lily knew it wasn't over. Not even close. They moved through the forest in silence, boots sinking into mud, breath sharp in the cold. Edward didn't speak, not at first. Lily followed him blindly, the box pressed to her chest. Behind them, gunmetal SUVs idled like wolves at the edge of the clearing, their beams slicing through trees but never reaching them. Finally, they reached an old maintenance tunnel, half-collapsed, rusted, hidden behind moss and brush. This leads under the old Grantham railway line, Edward said, pulling aside the iron grate. It hasn't been used in 40 years. Lily ducked through, shivering. Her limbs ached, but fear kept her sharp. The air inside was damp and metallic. They moved by flashlight, the walls curving in like an artery leading nowhere. Who are they, she finally asked. The people after us? People who once backed the project, he said. They believed in the science. They paid for silence. But when Catherine began recording her doubts, documenting everything, they turned on us. Why didn't you go public? Because I wasn't ready to die. He didn't say it with shame. He said it with resignation. And that frightened her more. After nearly a mile, they reached a ladder that led to a metal hatch. Where are we going? She asked. To someone I trust. Edward climbed first. When she emerged behind him, she found herself in an old train depot, long abandoned, now filled with crates and tarps and the scent of dust. A woman waited near a gas heater, wrapped in an old coat, gray hair pulled into a braid. Lily, she said gently. I'm Grace. Lily blinked. You're his sister. Grace nodded. I've been helping quietly. Getting the story ready. They sat. Lily laid the box on the floor. Grace opened it, eyes scanning the files, the vials, the photographs. Her expression shifted, not surprised, but sad. I told him to burn it all years ago, Grace whispered. He said the truth mattered too much. Even if it killed him. We need to go public, Lily said. Now. Grace met Edward's eyes. Are you ready for that? He said nothing for a long time. Then finally, yes. 3 weeks later, the article dropped. Inside the mind of Edward Grantham, a billionaire's secret science, buried wives, and the girl who escaped. Lily's name was in the byline, co-written with Tasha and a journalist from the Washington Ledger. The evidence was airtight. The documents, the journals, the accounts from Margaret. Even the medical files with Edward's initials signed beside each vial. The world exploded. TV segments. Debates. Accusations. Civil suits. Some painted Edward as a monster. Others as a visionary. But no one ignored it. And through it all, Lily stayed quiet. She moved into a small apartment outside the city. Josh recovered well. The hospital bills were still covered under a clause Edward had refused to cancel. She took no settlement. No hush money. Just her name, her truth, and the freedom she had almost lost. Edward disappeared after the article. Some said he fled to Argentina. Others claimed he was dead. But Lily knew better. Because one night she found a letter in her mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Just a single sheet. You were never supposed to be the experiment. But you became the cure. She cried reading it. Not because she missed him, but because some stories aren't clean. They're not about good people and bad people. They're about damage. And how we survive it. A year later, Lily stood in front of a classroom at a university in Boston lecturing on ethical whistleblowing and accountability in scientific research. Students listened closely. She never mentioned Grantham by name. She didn't have to. They knew. At night, she'd return home to her brother, now strong enough to cook. He'd tease her, ask if she missed the mansion. She'd laugh and tell him she preferred real windows to bulletproof ones. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before sleep, she'd dream of the East Wing. Of a piano. Of a photo beneath it. And wonder, not with fear, but with impossible tenderness, whether Catherine ever got to see the stars one last time before the lights went out. And if Edward ever found peace among the wreckage he built. She didn't know. But she knew she had. And that was enough.
Bye, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.